Hello students, today we will do another very important term used by Aristotle in his Poetics. In the Poetics, while defining tragedy, Aristotle writes that the function of tragedy is to arouse the emotions of pity and fear, and in this way to affect the catharsis of these emotions. Aristotle has used the term catharsis only once, but many and strange interpretations of the word have been given ever since the Renaissance. No phrase, probably in ancient or modern literature, has been handled so frequently by commentators and critics and by poets. Most varied and ingenious explanations have been given. This confusion arises from the fact that Aristotle himself has not explained what exactly he meant by the word, nor do we get any direct aid from the Poetics in interpreting the Greek phrase. For this reason, help and guidance has to be taken from his other works, more especially from his Politics and his Ethics. Further, the Greek word catharsis has three meanings. It means purgation, purification, and clarification. And each critic has used the word in one or the other sense and has reached accordingly to a different conclusion regarding the function and emotional effects of tragedy. All agree that tragedy arouses fear and pity, but there are sharp differences as to the process, the way by which the rousing of these emotions give pleasure. We would first examine the different interpretations of the word catharsis and then give the interpretation which seems most appealing and convincing. So, we will do first the meaning of the word catharsis. This Greek word has three meanings. First, purgation, second, purification, and third, clarification. Purgation means that it is a medical metaphor denoting pathological effect on the soul. So, by some, the process has been likened to homeopathic treatment with the like curing the like, and thus it is said the rousing of pity and fear results in the purgation of these emotions. This view is borne out by the passage in the Poetics where Aristotle refers to religious frenzy being cured by certain tunes which excite religious frenzy. In tragedy, pity and fear, artificially stirred, expel the latent pity and fear which we bring with us from real life. Such incidental emotions as anxiety, self-pity, etc. are also quietened. In our sympathy for the sufferer on the stage, we forget our own troubles and worries. In the pleasurable calm which follows when the passion is spent, an emotional cure is brought. Used in the medical sense, catharsis implies relief following previous excitation of the tragic emotions. In the neoclassical era, catharsis was taken to be an allopathic treatment with the unlike curing unlike. Thus, arousing of pity and fear was supposed to bring about the purgation or evacuation of other emotions like anger, pride, etc. The spectacle of suffering arouses our pity and fear, and we are purged by the emotions that caused the suffering. If the suffering is caused by emotions like anger, hatred, impiety, we are purged of such undesirable emotions because we realize their evil consequences. We learn from the terrible fates of evil men to avoid the vices they manifest. Now, the second theory which Aristotle gives is the purification theory. It is a kind of moral conditioning which the spectators undergo. Aristotle had medical leanings. His father was a doctor and he himself was keenly interested in the science, but he had no religious leanings, and hence it has been supposed that the word used in the medical sense only. Advocates of the purgation theory cite the passage towards the end of Politics referred to above, where he speaks of religious frenzy or mania being cured by certain religious tunes. This reminds us of Plato's concept of internal agitation being quelled by an external agitation, as we see in the case of a child who is crying and the nurse rocks the child so that he may go to sleep. From all this evidence, the critics conclude that Aristotle's conception of catharsis is that of a homeopathic treatment. It is a sort of mental cure brought about by the excitation of the emotions of pity and fear, and the purgation of all that is morbid and painful in these emotions. Tragedy, by arousing pity and fear, instead of suppressing them, trains them and bring back the soul to a balanced state. Catharsis is an educative and controlling process. However, neither the purgation theory nor the purification theory explains the whole thing. The basic defect of these theories is that they are too much occupied with the psychology of the audience, and hence he relates catharsis not to the emotions of the spectators as in the other two theories, but to the incidents which form the plot of tragedy, to what happens in the tragedy itself. And the result is the third theory, which is the clarification theory, which we have now to consider in some detail. Now, what is clarification theory? How does the pleasure proper to tragedy arise? Imitation does not produce pleasure in general, but only the sort of pleasure that comes from learning, and so also the peculiar pleasure of tragedy. Now, learning comes from discovering the relation that exists between the particular object or action represented and certain universal elements embodied in it. The poet might take his material from history or tradition, but he selects and orders it in terms of probability and necessity and represents what might be rather than what is. He rises from the particular to the general and so is more universal and more conducive to understanding, more philosophical, as Aristotle puts it, than history, which deals with the particular alone. Catharsis means clarification of essential and universal significance of the incidents depicted, leading to an enhanced understanding of the universal law which governs human life and destiny. In this view, catharsis is neither a medical term nor a religious or moral one, but an intellectual one. Catharsis is a process of learning and therefore pleasurable. The clarification theory has many merits. In the first place, it interprets the clause as a reference to the technique of tragedy and not to the psychology for the audience, and thus recognizes the true nature of the poetics as a technical treatise. Secondly, the theory is based on what Aristotle says in the Poetics itself and needs not the help and support of what Aristotle has said in his other works on politics and ethics. Thirdly, it relates catharsis both to the theory of imitation and to the discussion of probability and necessity. This experience, which is called insight experience of tragedy, is pleasurable because it is a kind of learning, the learning of the true relation between the particular incidents of the plot and the universal law of human life. The phrase insight experience, used by modern critics to designate the function of tragedy, is very much like Aristotle's catharsis when interpreted to mean clarification. To conclude, we can say that according to Aristotle, the basic tragic emotions are pity and fear, and both these are painful emotions. If tragedy is to give pleasure, pleasure that comes from learning, the pity and fear, or at least the painful element in them, must somehow or the other be eliminated. Fear is aroused when we see someone like us suffering and apprehend that a similar fate might befall us, and so it causes great pain. Pity is a feeling of pain caused by the sight of undeserved suffering of others, suffering which we might expect to befall us also. Pity and fear are reciprocal and painful. The events of tragedy are pitiable because they seem undeserved, and fearful because we fear that they may happen to us. In the tragedy, the spectator sees that it is tragic error or hamartia of the hero which results in suffering, and so he learns something about the universal relation between character and destiny.